it's Miss Winter again, and believe it or not, we're in the third week of the settlements of the U.S. unit. We have next week, and then the following week is going to be our major test grade. It'll be on Tuesday, October 20th, so make sure you're studying your notes and you're preparing, you're getting ready for this test. So the beginning of the week, we talked about slavery, indentured servants again. And some of us might still be asking yourselves, why? Why slavery? It's kind of hard to imagine. I will say these are some pictures of farming in the 21st century. And these are the types of equipment that we use today because we have the technology. Look how powerful these pieces of equipment are. Look how large they are. They were also very expensive to produce. And so just like today, we need this really heavy duty equipment to be able to do the job and to carry it. That's a similar thing that happened during the colonial times. So the people who were settling in the United States, or not the United States at the time yet, settling in this North American area, they were realizing that they weren't getting enough interest from indentured servants. Indentured servants, of course, like we talked about, were usually European as well, with white-colored skin. They would pay off a debt by working for a certain number of time, 2 to 7 years, and that wasn't enough to be able to farm all of their land. So the opportunity of slaves came about, and it seemed like a great idea. They're relatively expensive to buy, all things considered. You could sell them if you get too many at one time. It was also easy to track the slaves because since they were coming from Africa, they had brown or dark colored skin as opposed to the European settlers who mostly had white skin. They also had different languages and cultures. So if they did escape, it was hard for them to communicate and make their way around and survive out there. So to keep the slaves from revolting, from fighting and arguing about how they were being treated was not fair, their freedoms would be limited. They weren't taught to read and write so that they couldn't go out into the world and be productive. They weren't really allowed to travel on their own. Sometimes their families were separated. It really gave them a weakened sense of self because they lost everything they knew and they weren't treated very kindly. So that leads us to South Carolina, our slavery in South Carolina. So because the slaves were coming in on ships, they would need to come in through coastal areas. And one of the big ports that they would come in through was Charleston, South Carolina. It's about a 4-hour drive from Greenville. And here's some pictures of Charleston. That's an actual marketplace that they used to auction slaves off. And this is a sign that explains the history of what was happening in Charleston as far as slave auctions go. So the ships came, brought the slaves to the area, and over time, the slaves in South Carolina, they were able to build a strong community. Even though they were from different parts of Africa, they were able to blend cultures, especially because the coastal areas of South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, they had a lot of islands, so it kept the slaves together. So they were able to find different ways to communicate and build a lifestyle together. So they had a lot of shared traits, and this is the Gola culture. This is a picture of a woman who's doing some basket weaving, which is popular in the Gola culture. We watched a video earlier this week where you could hear a woman speaking in the Gola language. And there were other things too, like having heavy-duty rice dishes and storytelling. And all of these things were really heavy in their culture. So they were able to create a community. But that wasn't necessarily always the case during slavery. I will say the slaves in South Carolina did tremendously help learn new farming skills. So we were able to produce really great rice in South Carolina because of their knowledge that they were able to bring. So then, the next day on Tuesday, we leapt into the 13 colonies. And I won't go too far into the 13 colonies. If you're interested in learning more, because we have a map quiz on Monday the 12th, then you can watch the other review video for the maps. But just as a reminder, our 13 colonies were mostly settled by England. And most of these were originally settled for the purpose of religious freedom. So a lot of the people that were coming to the colonies were highly religious, and they were coming for the purpose of being able to worship how they wanted. Which is ironic. We'll talk a little more about that later. But also, some people just came for economic opportunity once they heard how great the land and farming was over in North America. And a lot of our colonies were formed because of the king and who he wanted to give land to give them privileges and power so that he didn't have to rule them all by himself. He split up that power, and that was an English king. So a lot of our states were formed around the economy, well, now they're states, at the time they're colonies. A lot of our colonies were formed by how they did their economy or the geography, but also just what the king thought was fair to give to his friends. So the Southern Colonies. We should be the most familiar with the Southern Colonies because we live in the South. And the South was originally settled by Jamestown in Virginia. That was the first permanent settlement in North America. That was in 1607. So that was a very long time ago. And when they first settled, they struggled with their farming techniques. It took a while and they almost starved several times. But with help from techniques from the Native Americans and later the slaves that were living in the area, they were able to really benefit from features that the South has. We live here, so we know how extremely hot it gets during the summer and how our seasons can be really long. It's hot in the South most of the year. Right now it's fall and outside it is 81 degrees today. So that warmth really helps though when it comes to farming, especially because the land was really fertile. So the rich, fertile soil and the warm, long seasons really helped. There was also plenty of water in the form of rivers. So the South started really booming when it was producing cash crops. And cash crops are those crops that the farmers aren't growing just to eat themselves. They're growing to sell to different people and making a lot of it so that they can sell it. And some of those crops were tobacco, indigo, cotton, and rice from the other slide. And because of these things, the South became very heavily dependent on slaves. Slavery was very prominent in the South. We also have the Middle Colonies. The Middle Colonies are between the Southern Colonies and the New England Colonies. And the Dutch actually settled there first. And they settled in the area that we now know as New Jersey and New York. And they bought it from the Native Americans. Can you guys believe it? For once, the Native Americans were not treated unfairly. They were fairly compensated for this land. And because the Dutch settled there first, we did tend to have more settlers from different countries in the Middle Colonies. They also had good soil. They had very fertile river valleys, and because of that, they became the bread basket of the colonies, the bread basket. So if you think about a bread basket holds bread to share with others. So they were sharing a lot of their crops that they were able to grow on this strong land to the other colonies and to export it to other countries. One of their main crops was wheat. Wheat was incredibly big in the Middle Colonies. And we even can think of oats, right? Quaker oats. The Quakers settled in the Middle Colonies, and the Quakers were a religious group, but they truly believed in religious freedom for all, not just themselves. But I have to be honest with you guys, Quaker oats, it didn't form until much, much, much later, not during the colonial times. So this isn't really a true representation of our Quakers. I'd say, just delete that picture. Oh, yeah, there we go. Here's a picture of some of our Quakers that are gathering together to discuss. So while our Quakers were discussing policies in the Middle Colonies, we also have the New England Colonies. And the New England Colonies were very heavily religiously settled. In fact, the Mayflower expedition carried passengers that were searching for religious freedom, the Pilgrims. That was in 1620. They landed in Plymouth, Massachusetts. Puritans were also a group of religious settlers in the colonies. But the ironic thing we were talking about earlier is these groups of people searching for religious freedom didn't really specifically care about religious freedom for everyone. They just wanted their freedom to worship what they wanted that they weren't allowed to in their other country. And they persecuted other people of other religions. They might tell them that they can't settle in their colony and treat them unfairly. Now, about the New England colonies is that they had some really, really rocky soil. So here's a picture of a coastline of New England. Not all of New England looks that rocky, but the soil was pretty rocky. Also, because it's higher up north, the winters get much colder and the snow is heavier. It's a lot harsher than it is in the Middle Colonies and in the South. So because of those reasons, growing crops and cash crops wasn't the primary focus of the New England colonies. Instead, they had to find other ways to make money. They made money because a lot of their land is on the coast through fishing, whaling, producing lumber and sending that out, and shipbuilding. So all of these colonies have some connections to each other. They all helped each other build and grow over time. But there are plenty of differences too. Thanks for watching.